This is what Homer Simpson's neurologist found when he scanned Homer. Don't think that you're going to have to face that very often in your career. I want to make very clear that the assessment of central nervous system disorders as to site and lesion, where the brain is affected, determines the signs and symptoms of the disease process. So it doesn't matter whether it's a sharp force trauma, an abscess, a neoplastic tumor, a contra-coup injury, or an infection. If it's this portion of the frontal lobe that's affected, they'll have the same symptoms. Now, a gunshot wound is a lot different than an abscess in terms of total amount of tissue that's injured. So it's the lesion, right, the type of injury, not the location, but the type of injury that determines the rapidity, the severity, and the prognosis. Now in class, we're going to work on a very nifty scale for determining mental status. We're also going to use the Glasgow-Coma scale to determine levels of from blurred consciousness all the way to unconsciousness. So we're going to be working in lab on these in class. And over the next several class sessions, we'll work on motor and sensory changes that occur. As I indicated to you, the site of the pathology or injury, the pathology, whether it's injury or illness, wherever that occurs in the brain, it doesn't matter whether it's injury or illness, if it's located in that particular part of the brain, you're going to have similar symptoms. I've provided this for you so that you can see what portions of the brain have what functions. I think this is really worthwhile, and this will be important to you in our class on infection. We're going to have lab where we have different mechanisms of injury, but the same site, and so it would be worthwhile for you to have this available to you in class. One of the real means by which we're protected from brain injury is the blood-brain barrier. This barrier reduces the likelihood of infection. It's difficult for parasitic material, bacteria and virus to get into the brain, but once it gets into the brain, the immune system is not protective. And so this is a means by which this blood-brain barrier phenomenon reduces the likelihood of pathology to the brain. The brain has low antibodies, low white blood cells, and no lymphatic system. So once the infection gets there, not any help, not much help at all. Well, one of the infections of the central nervous system is inflammation of the meningeal layers. And so you know the dura mater, the arachnoid layer, and the pia mater. And if infection, viral or bacterial, or a myco-infection, which is fungal, moves into the meninges, so the meninges cover the brain and the spinal cord, then there's a contamination of the cerebral spinal fluid, and there's a violation of the blood-brain barrier. So a meningeal infection will tend to have symptoms that include these. Some of the tests that are utilized are Koenig's and Brudzinski, where stretch the meninges by flexing the neck and flexing the hip. That stretches the meninges, and if there's positive, they feel uncomfortable, they have pain with that. And then certainly it makes sense that if the meninges are infected, the cranial nerves can be infected, and we're going to give you some guidance on how to study those cranial nerves. Yeah, so we'll move forward with that. And then meningitis can lead to hydrocephalus. This can be a genetically predetermined or a result of infection, which it is in this case. And so how do we manage that? Well, the way we manage that is draining excessive CSF from the brain, putting in a shunt into the abdominal cavity. And so this may very well be organic, meaning that this is caused by genetics producing too much CSF. It would tend to cause hydrocephalus, displacement of the brain. So there's a shunting of this, and because it's biological and material, it'll break down. And so prognosis is better if this is caught early and there's a shunting of the excessive fluid. And viral meningitis, as opposed to bacterial meningitis, has these characteristics. It's a rapid onset. The person would have all the symptoms that we've shown you. Stretching the meninges would be uncomfortable to them, and they would possibility of headache, stiff neck, fever, seizures, and they'd have a positive spinal tap while they're do an assay of viral material in the CSF. Treatment of this includes treat the symptoms, analgesics for pain, anti-seizural for obviously to reduce the possibility of seizure, and then moderating the symptoms with acyclovir. And then bacterial infection, very often a sequel to upper respiratory infection, and signs and symptoms include these. You may have had these in your life, but in a little tiny person, the bulging at the fontanelle could indicate that there's increased intracranial pressure. And this is interesting to note, a high-pitched cry by the baby. Bacterial meningitis, the prognosis is not as good as for viral meningitis, which tends to run its course. This child obviously needs antibiotic treatment. If there's a deterioration of brain matter, then there can be tissue necrosis, hydrocephalus, the formation of cysts, and they might not survive. Treatment for this is to make sure that they get lots of water, moderate the intracranial pressure, because necrosis can result from the brain being displaced and too much pressure and not enough blood flow to the brain, and avascular necrosis can occur. Antibiotics, corticosteroids, and anti-seizural. Now we move to infection of the brain proper, and this is called encephalitis. This is where the gray matter of the central nervous system is infected by a virus or bacteria. The etiology is a vector infection from a mosquito or tick, and possibly through herpes simplex, a virus. This is a very grave condition. I provide this because this person is not conscious. This person is in grave danger. This is an emergent condition, altered consciousness, and depending upon the hemisphere that's affected, they could be paralyzed on the opposite side of the body. So hemiparegia means on half of the body. Aphasia means they don't speak. Ataxia means they don't have coordinated or meaningful movement. Seizures, hallucinations, memory deficits, coma, abnormal electroencephalogram, and positive spinal tap. When their cerebrospinal fluid is assessed, it'll demonstrate bacteria or virus. And so here are treatments. If the intracranial pressure gets too great, then there'd have to be an opening of the skull, and to relieve that pressure. And then if they stop breathing, then there needs to be breathing support, intertracheal breathing support. Brain abscesses are a plus and a curse when the body encounters, not just in the brain, but when a bacterial infection occurs, the body attempts to wall it off, and so the infection is contained in the abscess. That's a good thing. That keeps it from disseminating through other tissues. It's a bad thing because it's a space-occupying lesion. It displaces the brain, cranial nerves will be disrupted, and certainly the portion of the brain where the abscess is would have altered function or lost function. The cascade is localized encephalitis. The fibroblasts wall off the infection. It could be slow developing or very quickly developing. Very often in this particular case, one of the symptoms is going to be that the person has seizure and loss of consciousness. If the abscess herniates, then the disease is disseminated through more tissues. If the brain stem gets compressed, then that person will go into respiratory arrest because that's where the control center for respiration resides. And then here are signs and symptoms. Got to treat the cause. If it's bacterial, antibiotics certainly big time, probably through a PICC line to get large volume antibiotics in place. And then I want to share with you about prion disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, also called Kuru or bovine spongiform encephalitis. You know it as mad cow disease. This is the deterioration of the nervous system in people who consume brain matter in their diet. This has been a disease of ethnic groups that participate in cannibalism, or in this is a Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is an inherited disease of deterioration of the brain. People of Middle Eastern ethnicity have a greater problem with this, particularly the Jewish race. Ingesting of contaminated nervous system products, that could be, like I said, cannibalism, or it could be in another mammalian form. And I've provided for you some video that help you put this in your long-term memory. There are some foods that shouldn't be eaten. That's why there's inspection of food sources to make sure that that's not meat is infected, and that those animals would be quarantined. Okay, be a student of the central nervous system. Bless you. Bye.